Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to All Era Sports with Sirhan as I come to you live from Cincinnati, Ohio, in the United States of America on this 21st of January 2026. Today is a short, brief one, historical moment in the NFL and a historical season that's probably never going to be touched. I preview the two games coming up Sunday and a wild scene of Buffalo today, which has everybody asking questions. It makes you wonder what's going to happen to the future. And a historic trilogy in boxing, which probably catapulted an all-time great to a higher stature. Hope everyone had themselves a wonderful day today. A little warmer here in Cincinnati if you're watching. Not as bad as the other days. But mind you, this coming weekend, bundle up because it's going to get nasty over here. Let's sit aside here so you show the world what the gloves look like. Now it's just down to it. Is of course championship weekend Sunday, the AFC and NFC title games. I'll break this down the best I can because there's a lot of questions all over the place because all four teams going in just have more questions than answers. I'll try to break it down the best I can. Start with the AFC title game is taking place in Denver. It is the Patriots and the Broncos. The Broncos, of course, no Bo Nix out for the season after the unfortunate ankle break in that game. Going against the New England Patriots, who have, of course, Drake May, who's probably going to win your MVP, and also a defense that's pretty formidable and respectable. Going cross country to Mile High City. Of course, you know what happened Sunday with the Broncos, that electric win over Buffalo that basically was just handed to them, but they took advantage of it. So you have to give them credit for taking advantage of the opportunity. Going against a New England team with Drake May and that bunch of core on the offensive side, the 1-2 punch of Ramondre Stevenson and Travion Henderson at running back. Wide receivers, of course, the kingpin there is Stephon Diggs. And we talk about this particular game. The real story is we're going to get out of Jarrett Stidham, and can the Denver Broncos put together a plan to try and compete in this particular game. Now, they do have R.J. Harvey. They have, of course, the top receivers like, excuse me, who's my friend? I apologize. Cortland Sutton and Marvin Mims Jr. Also, that stingy defense we know led by Nick Bonito in the front seven and Patrick Surtain in the secondary. Zach Allen, among many others. Against the New England Patriots defense, when they got Milton Williams back, things changed. This is going to come down to what you're going to get out of Drake May. And we talk about what's going to take place here. I mean, everyone's going to point to whether Stidham can bring him something or not. Sean Payton's going to try and put together the ideal game plan. And we talk about what's about to take place here tomorrow, Sunday. The home crowd is going to do the best they can. But at the end of the day, if you're going to try to rely on someone to make a play for you, it's going to be either Drake May or Jarrett Stidham. You're still going to tip the door to Drake May simply because the New England Patriots have a more stabilizing option of the two. And this one, I think, is going to be a closer game than people think. People are saying New England's going to go in there and rock Denver. That's not going to happen because that defense is going to play lights out. They're going to do what they can to keep it close. But they struggled to put points on the board against Buffalo despite being handed the ball 5 times. All they basically did was settle for field goals and 1 touchdown. You can't do that against New England. And I think that's going to be the difference. I'm going to take the Patriots on the road, and I'm taking this on a lean, meaning I'm picking the Patriots, but I don't know what the spread is. I don't know what it's going to be, but I'm taking the Patriots by a pinch because, there's still questions about New England. Yeah, they had the so-called easy schedule, but they're here for a reason, and that's why I'm going to give them the edge, albeit not by much. And I think if the Patriots open up the offense, that's going to be the telling difference. Drake May is going to make the plays necessary, just enough to advance them to the Super Bowl. And that's going to be the difference. So the Patriots are my AFC Super Bowl after Sunday. Now to the NFC. And this is going to be interesting. It is the Rams and the Seahawks. Round 3 of this AFC NFC West Clash of the Titans. And their first 2 games, down to the wire. The first one, the Rams defense picked off Sam Darnold a boatload of times, but only settled for field goals because Seattle's defense was just lights out. As we know, that's been the Mike McDonald blueprint. And in the game in Seattle, it was basically a shootout where the Rams defense didn't show up, and they turned Sam Darnold into a prime Russell Wilson. And of course, he had the walk-off game-winning 2-point conversion and overtime to win it. Granted, the game was marred by odd plays and questionable calling across the board. But in this tilt, question I have is, which Rams defense are we going to see? The one that made life terrible for Sam Darnold in their first meeting in L.A., or the one that no-showed in Seattle and just turn Sam Darnold into a prime Russell Wilson? And I don't expect the Seahawks to give up 37 points like they did in that last meeting, because I'm sure that lit up Mike McDonald, and that defense has played lights out ever since, and they've been lights out all year long. I know Matt Stafford has the so-called thumb injury, but he looked fine to me Sunday against Chicago. It's just the cold weather key drops were made. And I know in the second game, Devontae Adams wasn't in the lineup for the Rams. He'll be there this time, and that's going to change things a little bit. And not having Zach Charbonnet for Seattle is a bit of a problem, but they still have Kenneth Walker III, and you have Jackson Smith-Njigba and Rashid Shaheed as targets for Sam Darnold. This is going to come down to which Rams defense we're going to get. The one that played the first time where they made life terrible for Sam Darnold. I mean, it looked like Sam Darnold was reliving that playoff game against the Rams last year. If you remember when Darnold was with Minnesota, going against the Seattle Rams defense last time. Or is it going to be the one where the Rams defense just takes a vacation and lets Sam Darnold go all prime Russell Wilson on you? Whatever it is, I think this time you're going to get somewhere in the middle, but I don't know if that's going to be good enough, because this Seattle defense is playing lights out. It's somewhere I haven't seen a defense played in maybe since the 2016 Broncos, that defense that shut down Cam Newton, 2015 defense. And we might have a similar situation here. And I'm going to tilt this not because of home field advantage up in the Northwest, because that Seattle team is different up there. I'm going to give that slimmest nod to Seattle. I'm taking the Seahawks on a lean. Again, I don't know what the spread is. I'm not even going to divulge into it, because I think spreads are out the window in championship week anyways. But I'm taking Seattle by a pinch, just because I think that defense is going to be good enough. But it's going to be key for them to win. As long as Sam Darnold just does what he's supposed to do and not go like he did last year in the playoffs when he was in Minnesota, they're going to be fine. I mean, you don't have to be the reason they win, but don't be the reason they lose if they lose it. If I said they have that lights out defense, if he channels his inner Trent Dilfer like Dilfer did in 2000 with the Baltimore Ravens, that might be good enough. And that's where I think everything's going to lie. Give me the Seahawks at home, albeit by a pinch. This one is this is a toss-up game. It's going to depend which Rams defense shows up. The one that made life terrible for Sam Darnold in their first meeting in LA early in the year, or the one that turned Sam Darnold into a prime Russell Wilson in the second game in Seattle and let Sam Darnold just ease into the walk-off 2-point conversion in that game. A lot of questions on that one. I'm just taking Seattle by default, largely because they're at home. But that one is a toss-up. And I think that'll be one of the better championship games for either conference in many, many years, because I think that one's going to be lit up. So my Super Bowl will be the New England Patriots and the Seattle Seahawks. May the best teams win. This is going to be a good one. I'm telling you, the one thing I hate about picking championship week, especially like this, it gets real dicey. And trying to get me to pick one of these, it's going to be egg in my face either way. If I don't pick one or either of them correct, I get it. It's so tough. I just want to sit back and watch it. But since this is the year where everybody wants to make the picks, I might as well give my own. Now to what took place today. And there's a lot to uncork of what took place in upstate New York. And there's a lot of questions that's going to have to be asked. This was the press conference that took place today after the firing of Bills head coach Sean McDermott. The press conference for Terry, new owner Terry Pegula, and the now member in charge of football operations Brandon Beane. And this is one of those where if you're employed by this team, doesn't matter what it is, you're going to put your resumes out there, and once you find a job, you're submitting your notice and you're leaving. Because if I'm in that organization in Buffalo right now, after watching that today, I'm getting the heck out of there. There's a reason why that franchise has hit the dumps since the 4 Super Bowl losses under then owner Ralph Wilson with head coach Martin Levy. And of course, the capper, I said the other night, it was ended in 2022 when Cincinnati went to Buffalo and beat the brakes off of them in that 2022 AFC divisional game. And this one just bottomed out, basically saying the coaching staff pushed for Keon Coleman to be drafted as a way to just throw everybody under the bus. And when presented with a question about the season ended, Pegula channels his inner Al Davis, the late owner of the Los Angeles / Oakland Raiders, basically saying it was a bad call, which we know it was the so-called catch by Brandon Cooks, where it was ripped away by Shaquan McMillan, when every replay showed it was an interception, clearly with the 2 eyes. I don't know how anyone couldn't see that as an interception. Still pointing the fingers at that, still trying to get involved. Basically, Pegula just threw the players and the coaching staff under the bus publicly, 18 feet under. That includes Keon Coleman. But there was a video that surfaced where it was Brandon Beane that was the one that made the choice. And Brandon Beane just didn't even say anything about it, just turned over to Terry Pegula, who felt the need to stick his nose where it shouldn't. If I'm anybody in that Bills organization, and that includes Josh Allen, it includes Josh Allen, and that includes Keon Coleman, I'm picking up that phone, I'm calling my agent, and I'm saying, find me another place. And I'm doing it right now. Anyone that saws that press conference knows that's the most embarrassing thing. And that's capitalism of narcissism at its finest when you think about it, because that's what it was. No accountability for the failures. And you have a franchise quarterback, the one as a caliber of Josh Allen, and you have a press conference like that, who knows what he's thinking? But I said, if I were him, I'm picking up that phone, I'm calling my agent and saying, get it out there, get me out of here. Because who knows, they're going to throw him under the bus here at some point, because they will. And that's why this organization has been what it was for the last almost 3 decades now, since losing 4 straight Super Bowls. And that press conference shows there's no signs of getting any better. Maybe Stephon Diggs was right about how this organization works. And basically the whole press conference today validated what Stephon Diggs said. Because it was just an embarrassment. And here you are still talking about the season, still talking about that play in Denver, saying that was a play that cost you the season and not looking at anything else. So that's all you need to know. Because that's your way just sweeping everything under the rug and throwing everything under the bus and like burying them alive at least, I would say 6 feet deep. I'd probably say 66 feet deep. And that's why we had what we had. We talk about this particular situation. And I said, anybody in that Buffalo Bills organization, specifically Cleon Coleman and Josh Allen, if I'm them guys right now, I'm picking up the phone, calling around, saying who would want me. I don't know who would want Cleon Coleman. That's a different story. But I'm sure at least a third of the teams would love to have Josh Allen. But if I'm Cleon Coleman and I'm Josh Allen, I'm picking up that phone, calling my agent, calling everybody else in the league and seeing who would want me. And then putting out there and saying, I want out of Buffalo. Because I don't know who would want to work for that type of ownership and that type of personnel at the executive levels. That's one of those ones where you go into the workplace and it becomes a toxic atmosphere. And when you leave, you're not searching for a job. And when you find it, you're putting your notice and you're getting the hell out of there. That's what I do if I'm players at Buffalo organization, specifically Cleon Coleman and Josh Allen. That is just a walking embarrassment for you to publicly and openly throw certain guys under the bus the way you did and just take no accountability for the makeup of that roster where you was set up to go to the Super Bowl with no Kansas City and no Patrick Mahomes, no Baltimore Lamar Jackson, no Cincinnati and Joe Burrow, and among many others, having teams like the Jaguars, the Chargers, among others, eliminated, and you had to set up to get there, and you failed, and you still make excuses for why you failed, and you do it as openly as that. It's an awful look. And those players on the Buffalo Bills roster, I don't know what they're thinking, but if I was a big chunk of them, I start picking up the phone, start looking around to see who would want them, and then when the time comes, I'm going to the Bills brass and saying, trade me or release me. Case closed. Some of those things that don't even belong to the public. If you're in a position, especially talk about public relations, because public relations could be the ultimate cutthroat business. And when you do things publicly, as what Terry Pagula and Brandon Beaton did today, and openly and blatantly and willfully, you're setting yourself up for failure. And if Brandon Beaton doesn't succeed and he loses his job over there at Buffalo, at whatever title he has now, because he got promoted weirdly, he'll never find another job ever again. And right now he's getting grilled. He's getting grilled still for between that first round pick for Stephon Diggs, because that first round pick, we're not being this fellow named Justin Jefferson. And we know what Justin Jefferson's done in the Minnesota Vikings. That stings Brandon Beaton more to this day. And not to mention, he once traded with the Kansas City Chiefs on a draft night. And who did Kansas City draft that night? This fellow named Patrick Mahomes. And I think we all know what the history is of Patrick Mahomes at that point. And if Brandon Beaton loses his job, he's like, he'll never get another job ever again. Plain and simple. And the fact there's no accountability or anything else makes the whole thing worse. Weird times. But good luck up there in Buffalo and upstate New York. Moving forward, you will going to need it, because not only should the guys there want out, but if I'm certain guys in that organization, I'm telling everybody in the league, don't even come here. Don't even come here, because you're going to get publicly embarrassed the way Cleon Coleman did today. And that's and if I'm Cleon Coleman, I'm not associating myself anything with Buffalo. I'm not walking to the locker room. I'm not even walking to the field. I'm not even walking anywhere near the city of Buffalo, whatever they have going on over there. I'm packing my bags. I'm moving out, and I'm not coming back. And whatever Buffalo wants to do, they can go ahead and do it. That's just unethical and unprofessional. And I know people pick on Cleon Coleman for a lot of things. Sometimes rightfully so. But for this case, if I'm him, I'm going to just do a total walkout and never go back. Plain and simple. That takes care of that. In other news, Brian Flores signs the extension with the Minnesota Vikings as a defensive coordinator, assuming he doesn't get a head coaching job. I said all along, this guy it's going to be tough because he had that lawsuit against the NFL, and nobody wants to take a chance on him. The good thing for him is he has that security blanket, and we know the defense he put together in Minnesota. So that's probably more likely going to go back if nobody hires him. But it's nice to have a security blanket, and we know what he did at that defense in Minnesota. So he has that just in case something happens. But the fact that owners are going to hold that against him says a lot about the character of the human beings that NFL owners are. It says a lot about who they are at the end of the day. Because people deserve another chance. Brian Flores told everybody the truth, but the problem is everybody hates the truth these days, especially in the NFL. And because of it, that's why Brian Flores is out in the cold since that happened. What the reasons are, people are going to make their own assumptions. I'm not going to get involved in it because it involves sensitive content, and I don't partake. But if this guy doesn't get another job in the NFL as a head coach or another shot, it's a disgrace. I know he has a lawsuit. I know owners don't take that too kindly. But it says more about the characters of the owners than it does Brian Flores, who told everybody the truth, but nobody likes the truth in the NFL. End of the story. And speaking of the NFL and coming up Super Bowls, we're going to trace back to one that took place 42 years ago at Stanford Stadium in Stanford, California, where the University of Stanford plays. It was, of course, the Super Bowl 19 between Joe Montana-led San Francisco 49ers and the Dan Marino-led Miami Dolphins. And you talk about all-time elite quarterback play, probably talk about two of the top 5 all-time greats to ever play the quarterback position in the NFL. And, reasons for it, you can dissect it all you want. But, if I had top 5, those should be on it. And I'll admit, I'll be biased toward both. And Joe Montana is always my number 1, and I'll admit I will be biased, much to the chagrin of people in Kansas City and New England, because my eyes seen it, and I let my 2 eyes do the dictating. 15-1 San Francisco. Let's talk about this one for a second. You're talking about an offense that was second in the league, but you had a defense that was first in the league, especially to talk about points allowed. And we talk about the second crazy thing about this 49ers defense. You had a secondary with Ronnie Lott, who we know who Ronnie Lott is. A Hall of Fame moved from cornerback to safety in '84, and was a linchpin of that 49ers secondary. You had Eric Wright. You had Dwight Hicks, called the secret weapon, part of the Hot Lick secondary, and Carlton Williamson. And those 4 names I mentioned all had Pro Bowl, had Pro Bowl nominees and became part of an All-Pro team. An entire secondary getting all kinds of Pro Bowl recognition. And everybody talks about that offense, of course, when you have the great Joe Montana, you're going to talk about it. When you talk about this defensive roster, you're talking about a defensive lineman like Dwayne Board, who had 10 sacks. And back then, you get 10 sacks, you're cream of the crop. You get guys like Manu Tuiasopo, Jim Stuckey, Fred Dean, among many others on the defensive front. Rotated very well, and they really did hold their own. And we talk about the linebackers, guys like Keena Turner, 4 interceptions and 2 sacks of his own. Gary Johnson had 5 sacks of his own and a fumble recovery for a touchdown. Dan Bunds was a very good, solid coverage linebacker. I talked about the secondary. Of course, in there is Dana McEmore, who had 2 interceptions, including a pick 6 in the middle of it. So everybody talks about the 49ers offense, and rightfully so. We talk about the great Joe Montana and the mastermind of the great Bill Walsh. But that defense was every bit the problem that the offense was for the rest of the league. I mean, the team only lost, we talk about the 49ers that went 15-1. They lost 1 game all year long. That 1 game was week 7 at Pittsburgh, and they only lost it by 3 points. So they're basically 3 points away from a perfect season. So that tells you what the 49ers in 84 had. Now we move on to the 1984 Miami Dolphins. Of course, the great Dan Marino. The 5084 was just forever the gold standard. And you talk about number one offense across the board. And we throw for 5,084 yards in 1984. You're going to have the number one ranked offense. Because I remind everybody, again, 5,084 that season wasn't without rules changes, wasn't without the use of, soft calls or whatever everybody wants to call it. They let you play. And Dan Marino, you didn't have the wide receivers we have today now, or even some of the ones before it. But the number 5084 will probably be the most impressive feat in NFL single season history, due to the fact that he did it at a time when they allowed a lot of things. And he had Mark Clayton and Mark Duper, who were very, very, very good receivers, but no one's going to mistake him for guys like Jerry Rice or some of the other all-time great receivers we had. But how he did it speaks volumes as to how great the great Dan Marino was. And we talk about carrying an offense. That 5,084 was what Dan Marino did, because that defense was barely good enough to be middle of the pack. I mean, it was 19th overall, and they allowed their rush defense was most tied for most, allowed barely under 5 a carry, and they were solid, but they were also vulnerable, especially to the run game. They had a bit of a bend but don't break approach, but still they managed to go 14-2 that year to get to the Super Bowl. And we had this historic matchup. And we talk about this particular game. For a minute, it looked like it started out as if after the Dolphins force a 49ers to punt. The real story is the mastermind of Bill Walsh, which he went to a 4-1-6 defense with Keena Turner as a linebacker, the lone linebacker, to slow down that passing attack, which has been the bread and butter of the Miami Dolphins throughout the 84 season, and found a way to force an early 3 and out. And after it got to that point, after the Dolphins got to that point, the 49ers started to take over. It was at that point in the second quarter where things started to shift. Remember, we talked about the first quarter. What happened here? I'm looking at the first quarter here. 49ers couldn't score on their first possession. They came back. It was 10-7 Miami. The biggest one, of course, was the touchdown drive by Dan Marino that set up the touchdown. As we go to the second quarter, the 49ers said, heck with it, we're taking over. And the versatility of that defense, which is not talked about enough, is what took over. And life was terrible for Dan Marino and the Dolphins. And you had a feeling it was coming to the end. After the switch to go 4-1-6 on that defense, Dwight Hicks broke up 2 passes from Dan Marino. They punted, and they took the ball over midfield, and Joe Montana went to work. And the first play for him in the second quarter was a 19-yard run. Nobody knows Joe Montana as a runner, but he had better mobility than you think, because he was known as a pure pocket passer and a so-called advanced game manager, for whatever the terminology you wanted to use. But that 19-yard run and then a 16-yard pass to Dwight Clark set everything up. And then the 8-yard touchdown pass to the great Roger Craig. And the 49ers overtook the lead 14-10 at that point. And from there forward, the game was basically over. I mean, Miami barely moved the ball. I mean, they got going in the second half, but Dwayne Board had a big sack on Dan Marino. Miami was forced to punt, and the 49ers just took it all over from there. The defense just made life terrible for the Miami Dolphins. And as the San Francisco 49ers went on their way to winning the second Super Bowl in a 4-year period. Remember, they won it in '81. Mr. Play came back here to just abominate the Miami Dolphins and to conclude their season 17-1. It should be 18-1, and hoist their second trophy. And Joe Montana was your Super Bowl MVP, who threw for a Super Bowl record at the time, 331 yards, and of course, it's been surpassed, but it was a record at the time. When you think about this, here's one thing everybody misses when you talk about this game. This was the year before they drafted Jerry Rice. I mean, this was supposed to. Everybody said, Joe Montana had Jerry Rice. Jerry Rice wasn't on this roster. His number one receiver at the time was at the wide receiver position was Freddie Solomon, and no one's going to mistake Freddie Solomon for Jerry Rice. Of course, he had Dwight Clark. He had Roger Craig. But I said this about Joe Montana before, and this is why I put him as high as I do. And this is true for all quarterbacks, but I go by what the IC we talk about Joe Montana. When you have weapons at your disposal and you know how to utilize those weapons to their strengths, the way Joe Montana did during the Super Bowl run, and especially in this game, which is what he did a lot of, you're going to have a lot of success on offense. And that's why Joe Montana and the 49ers just carved up the Miami Dolphins defense en route to the Super Bowl win. Yes, everybody's going to say Miami's defense was mediocre. They were 19th overall and allowed the most rush yards per attempt at nearly 5 a game. But Joe Montana, what made him successful and what made him great, you can say he had all the weapons, and he did. There's no lying about that. But utilizing your assets to the tune of their strengths, the way Joe Montana did throughout his career, is why he has the standard he has. And it's always going to be a gold standard when you talk about quarterback play at all levels of football. Not just in the NFL, which we know that is the case. He was the same way in high school, and he was the same way at Notre Dame when he was in college. And that's what made Joe Montana one of a kind. And he did it here to the tune of 24 for 35, 331 yards, a passer rating of 127.2. At the time, they were records. And they were records at a time when you didn't need any freaking rules changes like the way we do today. He just played the game, took what was given, made the most of what he had, and that's why he had the success he had in the 80s. And this being the apex of it. And that's why I'll always say, my GOAT is, was, and always will be the great Joe Montana. Now for the other side, the great Dan Marino. Just like Montana, he had great weapons. He used it to his disposal. He did as well as he could. And I've said this a long about with him. 5,084, maybe more impressive. It may be the most impressive in NFL history when you consider that he did it at a time when more was allowed in the NFL game as it was then, as opposed to today. And he had it with Mark Clayton and Mark Duper. And not that 5,084, he did it rather effortlessly just to get there. And he had a more balanced attack when we talk about his offense. We talk about the running backs he had. But Dan Marino is always going to be known as a prototypical quarterback who got to one Super Bowl and could never get back. And sometimes I think it's overused against him for one reason. Didn't have the greatest teams put together. And the one time he got there, they ran into a buzzsaw. And that buzzsaw was basically a historical buzzsaw. But yeah, you're going to give him the distinction of the greatest quarterback to never won the Super Bowl, maybe the greatest NFL player to do it, and it probably rightfully understood. Maybe it's like a backhanded compliment if you want to say that. But that sometimes is overused, and people use it against him in terms of the annals of NFL history, and it's just wrong. Because 5,084, what he did in the 1984 season, was the gold standard for at least 2.5 decades. And think about what he had when he had that single season record in 1984, and what it took to break it, and it took many things, how stats are computed differently, all the rule changes, obviously, and a different structure of the NFL today as it was back in 84, just to have that record broken. But Dan Marino, 5,084, in my opinion at least, will be the most impressive standard single season wise in NFL history, due to the fact that it came at a time where there were 15 million rule changes and things were tracked the right way. And that's why Dan Marino had the success he had that year. And we talk about this game and the rest of the way for his career, the guy was still setting all kinds of records. The guy was still putting up crazy numbers, but maybe never had the stature that he had in the 1984 season when he went 5,084. And that's what made Dan Marino an all-time great quarterback. And we can use the word talent all you want in sports, especially in the quarterback position in football, because it can be used all over the place. Maybe in terms of just pure talent, no one had played the quarterback to the position or had it quite like Dan Marino, because he was way ahead of his time. We can look at how he played the game, because you insert that kind of a quarterback today with everything we know as the NFL today, with all the rules changes, how they track stats, how they run plays, how they utilize their top wide receivers. That number 5,084, Dan Marino will have it wrapped up before we get to December. That should tell you what Dan Marino was and what 5,084 meant in NFL history, because it was the gold standard. And for a longest time, everybody's saying, can you top it? And it looked like it was never going to be topped, because that should tell you everything right there. It took boatloads of rule changes, boatloads of how stats are tracked differently today as opposed to then. And of course, now they include the yards after catch as a part of the passing and receiving stat sheet, more so now than they did back then. And that should tell you why 5,084 for what Dan Marino did in the 84 season will forever be the gold standard. Because he did it at a time when you don't have to do all these rule changes. You don't have to. You just throw the ball. F it. Somebody's down there and just throw it up there. Dan Marino had many ways he could play the quarterback position, like Joe Montana. And I said these two were the gold standard of the 80s quarterbacks. These two, far and away. And what made these two successful is the weapons they used. They utilized them to their strengths, and they had success with it. Granted, Montana had more success, and there's another dynamic. I'm not even going to allude to it. But when you talk about their run to history, it's the same way. Granted, one had a different approach than the other, but at a time when basically quarterback play was about quarterback play and not the stat sheet, these two guys will forever be the gold standard. And I'll never put anybody over them just for that reason. Anybody can play for stats, including these two. There's no doubt about it. But when you play the position just for the sake of playing the position at the quarterback in the NFL, like Joe Montana and Dan Marino did, that alone stands out. And yes, Dan Marino is going to get a lot of whatever for not making it back to the Super Bowl after the 84 season. And everybody thought it was doable. We consider that number 5,084. But it tells you how tough it is to get back, especially now we have more parity in the NFL. And we talk about how strong both conferences were back in the 80s. It's a testament, maybe a positive testament, just how great Dan Marino was. Because when he set that standard was tough to reach for the longest time. And it's probably more of his legacy than as the never having won the Super Bowl. But that's what made Dan Marino great. Because the magic number of 5,084, when he did it in 1984, was probably a case of him being ahead of his time. And he did it without everything we see today. So you throw Dan Marino in today's NFL, give him a receiving core like we have today. We have a lot of elite level number one wide receivers. Give him one of those. And with his style of quarterbacking, 5,084 is wrapped up by December. And who knows what he does in December? Probably surpasses 6,000. That's to tell you what Dan Marino was. And Joe Montana will always be the gold standard of how to win. Because you can say anything you want. People call him a glorified Alex Smith, which I don't know what that's even true. But if you want to call him that, have at it. But the guy has 4 rings in his finger, and he did something right to get those 4 rings. Yes, he had great teams around him, but the gold standard of winning at that position at the highest level, and it's a different dynamic than we talk about with Dan Marino for obvious reasons. But Joe Montana knew how to win at the biggest games when the lights are bright and everything's focused on you. That's when Joe Montana delivered, and that's why he earned the nickname of Joe Cool, and rightfully so. And there's only one Joe Cool all time, and that goes by the name of Joe Montana. And his distinction as an elite level all-time great quarterback, number one in my opinion, will be forever solidified. And it was 42 years ago today. These two elite level, high all-time great high-level quarterbacks met in Super Bowl 19, and it was Joe Montana who put on the clinic in the middle of that great run they had in the 80s for the San Francisco 49ers. Montana wins a Super Bowl MVP and a second Super Bowl as they just pounce Dan Marino and the Dolphins. I mean, people are going to hold that not winning a Super Bowl against Dan Marino all you want. Doesn't turn the fact the guy's probably, in terms of just sheer talent, a top 5 all-time great quarterback, because that number of 5084 was a gold standard for 3 decades, and that's why he'll always be an all-time great quarterback. Any era, he can play in it. And he played at a time when you could allow a lot of things, and that's why 5084 is always going to be the gold standard. Phenomenal quarterbacks. Yes, one had more success than the other, but there's a lot of dynamic into it. I can break it down even further, but still doesn't deter the fact you had 2 of the 5 greatest quarterbacks to ever play that position in the NFL, and they'll always be the gold standard. So that takes care of the NFL segment, and we talk about a gold standard. We're going to go to the world of boxing, and a gold standard was set 48 years ago tonight. 48 years ago tonight in Las Vegas. It was the conclusion of the trilogy between Roberto Duran and Esteban DeJesus. I talk about how Montana and Marino were far and away the premier quarterbacks in the NFL. In boxing, in the lightweight division, the top 2 kingpins of the 70s were Roberto Duran and Esteban DeJesus. And the conclusion of the third fight was the winner was more than likely going to have the distinction of the greatest lightweight ever, along with being crowned the undisputed lightweight champ. And this was a trilogy. We talk about epic trilogies in the sport of boxing. This one isn't talked about enough. I'm going to give it the platform for it because it should be talked about more. Because let's go to the first fight. It was basically a non-title fight simply because both guys missed their contracted weight. I mean, we see that today, obviously. But the first punch Esteban DeJesus hit the Roberto Duran with, Duran hit the floor, and DeJesus used his boxing ability to keep Duran away to win the unanimous decision. And so it was 1-0 Esteban DeJesus. This is back in November of 1972. At the time, Roberto Duran was beating everybody. And here comes Esteban DeJesus, stopping the undefeated streak. So we go to the rematch. It takes place about a year and a half later. This is in the backyard of Panama, of Roberto Duran's home country. And in this fight, Same thing here. DeJesus gets off to the good start. Looked like he was going to control again. But this time, Roberto Duran showed the world why he was a hand of stone and why he was one of the toughest SOBs to ever lace up the gloves. He came on DeJesus, started a rally, pressured DeJesus, and just basically stop him in the 11th round to retain his championship. Now, between the second and third fights lasted 4 years. Well, in the middle of that, Esteban DeJesus won a world title, which made Duran-DeJesus 3 real spicy because it was for the ultimate distinction of the word undisputed. And that's what we had that took place in Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas 48 years ago. And the a lot of the pre-fight was just really crazy because the animosity was starting to build up a little bit. And we consider the high stakes for the undisputed lightweight title and potentially the distinction of the greatest lightweight in boxing history. That's what you had going into this third and final fight between these two combatants. And after the weigh-in, it was started with DeJesus just out of nowhere sucker punched Roberto Duran. And after he sucker punched him, a melee broke, and Duran just went on a verbal tirade saying, I don't like this guy. I know he floored me. I don't like him. I do respect him, but I'm going to whoop him. And when they fought 48 years ago in Caesar's Palace, that is essentially what Roberto Duran did. This time, what might be Roberto Duran's finest hour and maybe his most complete performance, when you think about this fight, he showed more than just being able to hit you with his power punch. He had versatile boxing skill and displayed it to all degrees against the great Esteban DeJesus. And basically, Duran just stepped up and showed a little wrinkle, a left jab that kept Esteban DeJesus on the defensive, so DeJesus couldn't come out and floor him in the first round like DeJesus did in the first two fights against Duran. And this time, he kept the pressure, and he kept coming out from all angles, had different angles of fighting in the lightweight division, and put on a clinic, and probably his most complete performance and his finest hour, when he just pummeled Esteban DeJesus and stopped him in the 11th round to become the undisputed lightweight champion of the world. A trilogy that's not talked about enough, but maybe we should, because when you think about the legacy of Roberto Duran, and this is before No Moss against Sugar Ray Leonard, we know about that one. This was his legacy, and this was his crowning moment, and this was a cleanup of the lightweight division, because for him to have any distinction in that weight class, he needed Esteban DeJesus and that extra championship. They put it together. Duran went undisputed and clean house. And that's what he did. And people think he's just this pure head-on brawler with this hard chin who's just going to come and rough you up. On this night, 48 years ago in Las Vegas, he showed he was more than just a brawler with the iron chin and the heavy hands. That he had underrated boxing ability and brought more to the table, especially in the lightweight division, as he did on this night, and showed his full arsenal to a tough fighter from Puerto Rico in Esteban DeJesus. And after having it dished out to him in the first two meetings, Duran just said, I'm Roberto Duran, I'm taking over. And he did just that, pulling every trick in the book and just giving Esteban DeJesus eventual, almost essentially say boxing lesson in a different way, but also a beating, and just hit him from every angle imaginable to where DeJesus just fell down and couldn't beat the count around 11. And Roberto Duran not only left that night the undisputed lightweight champion of the world, He left that night with a distinction of the greatest lightweight ever. And even though they had this as the official award, the fighter of the 70s. I mean, we go 72-1 in a decade like he did, and beat the top guys he did, and go undisputed, and have the distinction of the greatest ever in a weight class. That's your decade, and that's what Roberto Duran did to conclude his tenure as a lightweight and to conclude an epic wild trilogy with Esteban DeJesus to pummel him, to basically have Esteban DeJesus' body give out in the 11th round of that third fight, to symbolize just how great at lightweight Roberto Duran was. Now, you talk about the overall legacy. Everybody's going to point to No Mas a couple years later against Sugar Ray Leonard. I get it. But everyone that uses No Mas doesn't see the big picture with Roberto Duran. And as a fact, his legacy before it was cleaning out the lightweight division. I mean, you ask anybody, the general consensus, I won't say everybody, but most people will tell you the greatest lightweight ever was Manos de Piedra coming out of Panama City, Panama. And that is really his legacy. And when he got to that point, vacated the titles and went his run at welterweight and continued on with his greatness, that almost helped solidify his greatness at lightweight, simply because he went on to bigger and better things. But before No Mas, Roberto Duran was a nightmare. Sugar Ray Leonard could tell you that, because everybody's going to point to No Mas and anything that happened afterwards. But Duran said after he beat Leonard the first time in Montreal in 1980 that he just changed his lifestyle and it caught up to him. But before No Mas, in the lightweight division, the legacy was Roberto Duran, and the lightweight division was his for that period. And that's why he more than likely will have the distinction of the greatest lightweight to ever fight in the ring. And of course, there's a lot of hoop guys in that conversation, and a lot of great ones too. I mean, Henry Armstrong, Pernell Whitaker, Benny Leonard, Joe Gans, among many others. Maybe I could throw a few names out there. But Alexis Arguello obviously also had a great run at lightweight. But number one, widely regarded, will forever be Roberto Duran. There's always going to be a difference of opinion, but if you panel some of the real hardcore aficionados who saw him in action at his peak, they will tell you that he has that distinction of the greatest lightweight ever. And when you go undisputed at a time when undisputed meant everything, that helps that distinction for him, because when he wiped out the competition at lightweight, catapulted by what took place 48 years ago, that's why he has a distinction and earned it. And as far as Esteban DeJesus goes, a guy who should be in Canastota next to Roberto Duran, but we know he had a turbulent life outside of it, and it caught up to him, and he wound up spending the rest of the remaining years in prison before he contracted HIV disease, and he was sent to a hospital where he essentially died. And maybe the lasting image was after many years of bad blood between DeJesus and Duran. The image that shows around viral for the longest time was Roberto Duran visiting Esteban DeJesus in the hospital for one last time, and they embraced to bury all the bad blood over the years. And that was basically the last time anyone saw Esteban DeJesus, which was Roberto Duran. And we talk about the Latino greats. Duran's going to more likely number one. But ask everyone, where is Esteban DeJesus on your lists? He was as good as anyone. He belongs in the Hall of Fame. He probably uses out-of-the-ring behaviors against him to prevent him from going in. I mean, I get it. But it's the same thing we have in other sports with, off-field humanizing. And I say it's also with boxing. We've had fighters in there who've committed serious crimes that are in the Hall of Fame. But why are we holding this against Esteban DeJesus who was just as great as anyone at that time in the lightweight division. And if you don't know how great Esteban DeJesus is, ask Roberto Duran. He'll tell you to your face just how great Esteban DeJesus was. And the crime wasn't what he did and what, winding up in prison for life till he died. A bigger crime is, why is this being held against him from going to the Boxing Hall of Fame? We should have been in there a long, long time ago. Because Esteban DeJesus was as great as anyone. I mean, he was the only guy to beat Roberto Duran at lightweight. I said Duran went 71-1. The one was against Esteban DeJesus in the first fight. I mean, does he deserve any kind of respect for it? I mean, you think he does. And that's why I quit dealing with the fight community. You guys cherry pick the guys you should respect. Esteban DeJesus was as great as any lightweight in any era. He beat Roberto Duran, and the second fight gave him all he can handle. And a lot of quality wins. He managed to win a world championship along the way. Why isn't this guy in Canastota? He was as great as anyone. Probably say a top 15, a top 20 all-time great Latino fighter, and maybe a top 10 all-time Puerto Rican fighter. And he's certainly up there. Why isn't this guy in the Hall of Fame? Because it's a crime he's not in there. And one guy who would vouch for him would be Roberto Duran. Because Duran probably will tell you straight up, this guy gave me everything I can handle in the first two fights, and he did. This guy's every bit as great as Duran. I mean, at that level, I should say. Because he was damn good. And it's like his career has now become underrated because nobody talks about this guy as a great Latino or a great Puerto Rican fighter. He's up there. He belongs to Canastota just as much as anybody else does. His career speaks for itself. It's those out of the ring transgressions that's being held against him, and that's a bigger crime when you consider the guys in the Hall of Fame have had as big of crimes, and they're in there. And it goes to the hypocrisy of the Hall of Fame process. But it was 48 years ago tonight, Roberto Duran cemented his place in boxing history, cemented his status as the fighter of the 70s, and arguably the greatest lightweight in boxing history when he dismantled Esteban DeJesus in the third of their fight of their trilogy to win the undisputed lightweight championship at a time when going undisputed was the king of the crop. And that's what Roberto Duran was in that weight class when he finished off DeJesus at the end of their trilogy. After two fights where Duran and DeJesus gave Duran all he can handle, Roberto Duran said, "The heck with it. I'm pummeling this guy." And the sucker punch at the weigh-in lit a fire in Roberto Duran, and he took it on DeJesus to the tune of an 11th round knockout. A great trilogy. And we talk about great trilogies in the sport. We had a lot of them. I mean, Ali Frazier obviously is a gold standard. Ollie Norton not far behind it. Evander Holyfield, Riddick Bowe, Marco Antonio Barrera, Eric Morales, Floyd Patterson, and Ingemar Johansson, among many others. We should be talking about this one more because it was as great as some of them. Because the first two fights, Esteban DeJesus made Roberto Duran think deep. And because he made Duran think deep, it forced Duran to change the strategy for the third fight. And we saw probably Roberto Duran's finest hour and most complete performance of his Hall of Fame career. And pound for pound, all time, you can probably say Roberto Duran is definitely a top 10 or top 15 fighter. Yes, everybody's going to talk about No Mas. I get it. But his legacy was stamped before No Mas. That's one thing everybody misses. And that's one thing everybody needs to go take a look at. Because Duran was a nightmare before No Mas. Ask Sugar Ray Leonard about Duran Leonard won in Montreal. He'll tell you all about Roberto Duran. And what he says about Roberto Duran is spot on. You guys can figure it out for yourselves. And on this note, that'll wrap up this edition of All Era Sports with Sirhan. Tomorrow night, an all-time night defined in 3 words, and a phenom was introduced in a coming out party like none other. I relive that night, I break it down, and I live those famous 3 words that ranges on many, many decades later. Sit back and enjoy it. And as always, if you missed this show or any others, you can catch the audio replays on my Apple Podcast, my iHeartRadio, and my Patreon platforms. And if you want to catch the video versions, you can always watch them on the X platform as well as Facebook and Spotify. No fireplace today because actually decent day today. It was like in the mid-30s. And as always, make self-care your number one priority in all walks of life. If you take care of yourself first, respect other people's boundaries, and don't let anyone step over your boundaries, all the good things will happen. Always, always don't let anyone step on your boundaries. Once that happens, nothing else matters in the end. Always protect your boundaries. Make them about as firm as you could possibly can. And on that note, that'll wrap this night up. Take care of yourselves. God bless. An historical night tomorrow night. I relive it. I will see you then.